Officer Logan Crane saw Maya Ellison in the wrong hallway and didn't stop to ask why. He didn't check her ID. He didn't listen when she explained she was a registered legal advisor. He just grabbed her, pushed her to the ground, and handcuffed her right inside the courthouse. Maya wasn't yelling. She wasn't resisting. She was calm, professional, and knew the law better than most. But none of that mattered. To him, she didn't look like someone who belonged. And for that, she was treated like a criminal. But when Maya called her father a colonel working at the Pentagon, what came next changed everything. Would they finally face the truth or find another excuse to cover it up? She didn't come to be recognized. She came because someone who once wore the uniform with honor was now being treated like a criminal, and nobody seemed to care. The morning was gray and cold, the kind that made concrete courthouses look even more unforgiving. Maya Ellison pulled the collar of her coat up as she stepped through the front entrance of Ashford County Courthouse. No name tag, no military stripes. Just a woman in plain clothes carrying a thick brown folder and a quiet resolve. No one looked twice at her. That's how she preferred it. The metal detector beeped as she walked through. A guard waved her back and motioned for her to open her bag. He didn't greet her. He didn't even make eye contact. Just a glance at her skin, a frown, and a nod to the younger officer beside him. She complied without a word. She had been here before, not this courthouse, but this feeling. The quiet, sterile air, the tension in the hallway, the unspoken reminder that justice didn't always start on equal footing. What no one in that lobby knew, what they didn't bother to ask, was that Maya Ellison, 29, was the daughter of Colonel Samuel Ellison, a decorated officer currently stationed at the Pentagon. What no one saw because they weren't looking was that she'd once been a military legal officer herself, brilliant, sharp, promising, until one case unraveled everything. A young soldier, a wrongful conviction, and a legal system too stubborn to admit a mistake. She resigned the following week. Today, she wasn't here to fix the past. She was here to prevent another mistake. Deshaun Miller, 23. Black former infantry medic stood accused of assaulting a police officer. The headlines didn't mention that he was trying to break up a domestic violence incident, or that the woman he tried to protect was too afraid to testify, or that the officer in question had complaints stacked like unpaid parking tickets. What mattered, Maya knew, was the footage, a single body cam video that hadn't made its way into evidence. She had it. She knew the chain of custody. She knew the law. She also knew how this place worked and how quickly it dismissed people like Deshaun. As she walked past the reception desk, a clerk glanced up, uninterested. "Can I help you?" he asked flatly. "I'm here for the Miller case. I need to submit a motion for review. I have new video evidence." He blinked, then reached for a clipboard. "You an attorney?" "Yes," she replied simply, pulling out her ID. The moment his eyes landed on her credentials, there was a flicker of doubt, as if he were searching for something, maybe an error, or some reason to send her back out the door. "You're not with the public defender's office?" "No, independent legal counsel." He nodded slowly. "You can fill this out, but the judge may not accept late submissions." Maya offered a polite smile. "That's not for you to decide." She took the clipboard, stepped aside, and began to fill it out. Her handwriting was clean, deliberate. No wasted motion. Behind her, she could feel the eyes of the security team on her back. She was used to it. The constant questioning of whether she belonged. One officer whispered something to another. They laughed quietly. She didn't flinch. There was no need to announce who she was. No need to drop her father's name like a shield. That wasn't why she was here. Her value didn't come from rank or reputation. It came from the truth she carried in that folder, and the quiet fire in her chest that told her if no one else would stand for Deshaun Miller, she would. The courtroom doors were just ahead. She took a breath and walked forward into the silence, into the doubt, into the weight of a system that had failed too many before him. And this time she would not let it happen again. The hallway outside courtroom 3B smelled faintly of old paper and fresh floor wax. The kind of sterile scent that clung to the walls that reminded Maya of too many late nights reading case files, too many silent exits after verdicts that never felt right. She stood at the clerk's window file in hand, motion already filled out, perfectly formatted, signed, time-stamped. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with tight curls and tired eyes, barely glanced at the folder before sliding it back across the counter. "This isn't the proper format," she said without looking up. Maya blinked. "It follows all court standards. Article 5, subsection B, I double-checked." The woman shrugged. "Judge wants everything in the updated layout now." "New template, you'll have to refile." Behind her, a younger clerk stifled a yawn. No one offered a solution. No one even offered a copy of the new format. Maya didn't argue. She simply took the folder back, but her fingers curled around its edge just a little tighter. It wasn't the first time the system had rejected her, not because she was wrong, but because it could. She stepped aside and sat down on one of the hard benches that lined the hallway. Cold metal against her back, a chill deeper than air conditioning ran through her. She opened her laptop, adjusted the document, reformatted everything from scratch. The motion hadn't changed, only the way it was dressed. Behind her, footsteps echoed, measured, confident. A male voice, smooth like scotch, broke the quiet. Well, I'll be damned. Maya didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Wesley Burke, tall, polished, white. A defense attorney who made his name arguing the unwinnable by making juries forget what color his clients were. He was there the night her career cracked open, the night the wrong man went to prison. He stood beside her now, hands in his pockets, a smirk playing on his lips, like a well-rehearsed closing argument. Didn't expect to see you back in a courtroom, he said, his tone just light enough to pretend it was casual. Maya kept her eyes on the screen. People change. Systems don't. He chuckled. Still idealistic, even after all that mess. She didn't answer. But something flickered behind her eyes, not anger, not pride. Fear, the quiet kind. The kind you don't talk about. The kind that settles in your spine when you walk into a place that once broke you. She remembered the feeling. Watching a guilty verdict fall on a man she knew was innocent. Watching the courtroom empty out while she sat frozen in her chair, the only one left believing in justice that day. The press had been brutal. The review board even worse. She wasn't disbarred, but they didn't have to take your license to take your voice. She came back today, not as a soldier of the system, but as its witness and its warning. Wesley tilted his head, still fighting the same battles. This isn't about me, she replied, her voice steady. No, he said, flashing a half smile. But the courtroom remembers. She stood, calmly, laptop closed, file reprinted. As she walked past him, she said without turning her head, so do I. He didn't follow. Back at the window, the clerk took the refiled motion without a word. Maya exhaled softly as the timestamp hit the paper. It was accepted. No apologies, no recognition, just a cold stamp and a colder nod. She stepped back again, this time not to retreat, but to wait. Outside courtroom 3B, the door remained closed. The hallway had grown quieter, but the ghosts hadn't left. They lived in the walls, in the glances, in the rules rewritten just out of reach. But Maya Ellison was still here, and this time she knew how to stand her ground even when the ground itself was tilted. The courtroom wasn't full, but it felt crowded, packed with assumptions, murmurs, and the echo of footsteps that carried more judgment than curiosity. Maya sat quietly behind the defense table, not as the lead attorney, but as support. The public defender, a young man named Harris, was doing his best. Nervous, polite, and clearly overworked. Across the aisle, the prosecution had just pulled up a statute section 241 of the state criminal code and was building a case for aggravated assault on a peace officer. The assistant DA, a woman in her 40s with a sharp bob and a sharper tongue, walked slowly before the jury as she spoke. And under this provision, Mr. Miller's actions, grabbing the officer's arm even in a so-called moment of confusion, constitute a felony. Maya's eyes didn't leave her notepad. She wrote quickly, flipped a tab in the folder beside her, and turned her head slightly toward Harris. Her voice was soft, almost too soft. That statute was amended last quarter. The threshold for aggravated assault now requires intent to cause bodily harm. Mere contact isn't enough. Harris blinked, looked down at the page she'd marked for him, and hesitated. Maya didn't push, but she did stand. Your Honor, she said calmly. Permission to clarify for the court. All eyes turned to her. The judge, a thin man with reading glasses perched low on his nose, raised a brow. You're not listed as lead counsel, Ms. Ellison, she said. I'm assisting the defense with evidentiary review. There was a pause, then a nod. Proceed, briefly. She stepped forward, not to the center, not in front of the jury, just to the side of the table. The prosecution cited Section 241 of the Criminal Code. However, that statute was amended as of January 1st. I have the revised text here with the governor's signature date. The amendment redefines the threshold for aggravated assault, excluding incidental physical contact without intent to injure. She placed a single sheet on the evidence table. Clean, highlighted, date stamped. The judge leaned in to read. The prosecutor frowned, already shuffling papers to verify. And in the gallery, a rustle of papers stopped. A few people sat up straighter. But Maya wasn't done. She turned slightly toward the witness stand, where a young man barely out of high school in a wrinkled shirt and chewing the inside of his cheek sat, arms folded. He had been there the night Deshawn intervened. He saw the officer grab the woman. He saw Deshawn pull him away. But under oath earlier he'd faltered, said he couldn't remember clearly. Now Maya looked at him, not with pressure, not with force, just understanding. "I know you've been nervous," she said, addressing the judge but glancing at the witness. "But sometimes the truth just needs space to breathe." The boy looked at her eyes wide, then back at the judge. Yeah, he said suddenly. "That's right. He wasn't attacking anyone. He was stopping the cop. The woman was crying. She was scared. That's why Deshawn stepped in." The prosecutor objected, but the judge overruled. Maya returned to her seat. No victory smile, no grand performance, just silence. A heavy, unexpected silence that settled over the room like a truth finally spoken aloud. In that moment, it was clear she wasn't here to win applause. She wasn't trying to dominate the floor. She simply knew what was right and how to show it without needing to shout. One juror glanced at another. A few heads nodded subtly. The tide hadn't turned, but it had shifted. And the woman in the plain blazer with the quiet voice was no longer invisible. She was undeniable. It was supposed to be a quick detour. Just a file. One last document that hadn't made it into the motion packet earlier. Maya had double-checked the delivery time. The clerk had told her it could still be added before the judge ruled on admissibility. She just had to bring it directly to the internal docket office on the second floor. But when she exited the stairwell, the hallway ahead split in two left to the records room, right to a service corridor. The signs were faded letters half peeled. No arrows, no lighting, no clarity. She turned right. The walls narrowed as she moved down the corridor. A faint hum of overhead lighting buzzed above. Somewhere behind a door, an HVAC unit clanked. A few feet ahead was a steel door marked court staff access only in barely visible gray print. She paused uncertain, then took one more step. "Hey!" The voice snapped like a whip. From behind a side alcove, Officer Logan Crane emerged. Late 40s, square-jawed, broad-shouldered, white. His belt heavy with gear posture, stiff with practiced control. He didn't look confused. He looked ready. "This is restricted," he barked. "Who told you to come back here?" Maya raised both hands, palm out, folder still in one. "I'm an attorney," she said calmly. "I was told to deliver this to the internal clerk's office. The hallway signage isn't marked clearly." Crane didn't budge. "I don't care what you think this is. You're in a secure area." "I have my ID," she added, already pulling it from her coat pocket, "and my bar card." She held them out clearly visibly. Crane didn't look. Instead, he reached for the radio at his shoulder. "Unit 6, we've got unauthorized access. Need a second set of eyes, second floor service corridor. Possible breach." Sir Maya began, voice steady but firm. "There's no breach. I'm here under instruction from court staff." This is a misunderstanding. But he had already moved in front of her, one hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon, not drawn, not aimed, but placed just visibly enough to send a message. "You don't belong back here," he said, voice low. "I don't care why you're here." She held her ground folder still in hand. "I'm not resisting. I've explained myself clearly. Please just look at my badge." Crane's eyes didn't flicker. They remained locked on her face, not as a professional assessing the situation, but as a man who had already decided what she represented. The sound of approaching boots echoed from behind. Two more officers rounded the corner. Both white, both younger. One of them glanced at Maya's ID, which she was still holding out, but said nothing. Crane didn't explain the situation to them. He didn't need to. "This is protocol," he said. She ignored signage and entered a restricted zone. "She didn't ignore anything," Maya replied, finally lowering her ID. "The sign is unreadable. If you'd stop talking at me and start listening, you'd see this isn't an infraction. It's a hallway, not a battlefield." That was when he stepped closer. "Hands where I can see them." Her voice dropped to a whisper, not afraid, just exhausted. "You already saw them." The hallway had grown still. The air itself heavy with the weight of too many moments like this. Seen, repeated, dismissed, and now recorded. Somewhere behind them, a soft electronic click broke the tension. A phone being held just out of sight by a courthouse custodian. Recording, watching. Crane didn't notice, but Maya did. She didn't yell, didn't plead, just stood there poised in silence, refusing to shrink. It wasn't the wrong door. It was the right system showing its true face. And it didn't matter what door she walked through. It was never built for her. The cold hit first unforgiving tile, biting into her cheek like punishment handed down without a verdict. Maya lay face down, the polished marble of the courthouse floor pressing into her skin. One arm twisted behind her back, the other pinned beneath her. Her folder thick with truth had burst open beside her, papers fluttering uselessly like broken wings. Officer Logan Crane knelt over her, his knee wedged into the small of her back. Not in rage, not in chaos, with control, with the steady weight of someone who knew no one would question him. "I'm not resisting," Maya said, voice tight from the pressure, but unmistakably clear. "There's no need for this." "You were warned," Crane snapped. "You crossed a restricted line. I was delivering legal documents authorized. I showed you my credentials." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Two more officers arrived, their boots echoing off the walls like punctuation. One picked up her ID but didn't read it. The other kicked her folder aside like clutter. Not a word was said about the motion she had tried to submit. It was invisible now, like her. Down the corridor near the elevator bay, a courthouse employee in a navy suit leaned toward a colleague. "Wait, isn't that the lawyer working on that vet's case, the guy Miller?" A pause. "Yeah, that's her." But no one stepped forward. No one intervened. Because in this building, a black woman on the ground in handcuffs wasn't unusual. It was routine. They pulled her up roughly. The cuffs bit red rings into her wrists. Her coat hung crooked, one side slipping off her shoulder. She didn't fight it, didn't try to fix it. As they began to march her down the hallway, Maya turned her head just enough for her voice to carry, but only just. "You didn't arrest me because I broke the law," she said, locking eyes with Crane. "You arrested me because I didn't fit." The hallway stilled. The elevator beeped softly in the distance. A clerk coughed behind a closed office door. But no one made a sound, not in the space around her, not in the space within themselves where something deeper had just shifted. She hadn't raised her voice, but the words landed like bricks on marble. Even Crane didn't respond, not this time. And a few feet back by the janitor's cart, a courthouse custodian slowly lowered his phone. He had been filming silently, steadily. He didn't say a word, just slipped the device into his pocket, his eyes never leaving Maya as she disappeared down the corridor. The walk to the holding room was long, longer than the hallway itself. She wasn't read her rights. No one explained the charges, because there were none. She was put in a room with concrete walls and a metal bench bolted to the floor. No window, no clock, no voice to remind her she still had one. And yet even here, Maya didn't collapse. She sat, back straight, wrists raw, dignity unshaken. Because deep down she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about how easily a system could bury someone who tried to speak not with noise, but with knowledge. And how terrified that system became when the person refused to stay buried. The walls in the administrative holding room were the color of dried glue. Pale, soundless. A space designed to make people forget they had rights. Maya sat with her hands resting gently on her knees. The cuffs had been removed, but the marks still lingered, not just on her wrists, but in the air. Across from her, Officer Crane stood with arms crossed, jaw tight. Next to him, a courthouse adjudicator named Danielle Hall, mid-50s, gray blazer, clipped speech, held a folder and a practiced neutrality. "You may speak," Hall said. "We'll log your statement before proceeding with any internal recommendations." Maya nodded once. I entered the corridor outside records to deliver a supplemental motion, cleared by the clerk's office 30 minutes earlier. The signage was not legible. No barriers, no prior warning of restricted access. She kept her tone steady, her eyes focused not on Crane but on Hall. When Officer Crane approached, I identified myself clearly, verbally, presented both my state bar card and my court-issued attorney badge. He chose not to verify them. Crane shifted. There was no time to... I wasn't resisting. Maya continued, not acknowledging him. I stood still. I complied. He called for backup before asking for any clarification. Hall took notes slowly, methodically. "And what exactly are you claiming was mishandled?" Maya inhaled once, then began. "Violation of procedural standards, no attempt to confirm credentials before detainment, no verbal clarification of charges, no Miranda rights read, physical restraint applied without escalation or threat." Crane opened his mouth to object. She turned her head just enough to speak directly to him, still calm, still precise. "You did not ask who I was, you decided who I was." Hall looked up. "Are you suggesting racial profiling?" Maya didn't blink. "I'm stating that my legal status was ignored, that my documented presence as legal counsel was disregarded, and that a white attorney in the same hallway with the same folder would not be sitting here." Crane scoffed, arms tightening across his chest. "I didn't see your badge. You were in a restricted zone. It was a tense situation. I acted on instinct." Maya's gaze didn't waver. "Your instinct was built on perception, not fact." Hall stayed silent, pen paused mid-word. Maya leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, deliberate. I can quote federal code all day. Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. Fourth Amendment protections. Due process under state criminal procedure. But none of that matters if the people enforcing the law feel exempt from it. She let the words settle. There was no rise in volume, no emotion pushed to the surface, just the weight of logic delivered like a gavel. I wasn't detained because of my actions, she concluded. I was detained because I didn't match the expectation of someone who belongs. The room didn't shift. It didn't need to. But something inside Crane's stance cracked not visibly but in the tightening of his jaw, the way he avoided her eyes now. Hall adjusted her glasses. This will be reviewed. I hope it will, Maya replied. Because if it isn't, it will be repeated. No one said another word. A minute later, Hall stood and left the room. Crane lingered a second longer, then followed. Maya was alone again. She looked at her hands. The skin at her wrists was tender, but steady. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. One notification, just a name. Dad? She stared at it for a long second, then turned the screen off and placed the phone face down beside her. Not yet. Not until she had done everything she could with nothing but the law in her voice. The waiting room had no clock, but Maya could feel time tightening around her. The room had grown colder, not in temperature, but in silence. A kind of silence that wasn't indifferent anymore. It was intentional. When the guard returned, he didn't speak. He just handed her a piece of paper and walked out. Preliminary internal review complete. Subject to disciplinary process. Referred for potential prosecution. Obstruction of court procedure. No hearing. No argument. Just a quiet attempt to bury her in paperwork. Maya read it once, then again. Then she folded the page in half, smoothed the crease, and placed it beside her on the bench. She pulled out her phone, scrolled past unread texts, missed calls, stopped at one name, Dad, Pentagon secure line. Her thumb hesitated. This wasn't a call to be saved. This was a call to remind them she wasn't invisible. She pressed the button. A few encryption tones, then silence. Until Ellison. She didn't speak at first. Maya, the voice said again, lower now. Tell me what they did. She did. Calm, exact, no drama. She told him everything, the false report, the refusal to see her ID, the cuffs, the paper on the bench. He listened. All the way through. When she finished, there was only this. I'll make a call. Stay where you are. The line went dead. She placed the phone down beside her, face down, and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 5 more. Nothing changed until everything did. Upstairs, courtroom 3B, was halfway through a minor pretrial hearing when a clerk slipped a note to Judge Glenn Murray. He unfolded it slowly, paused, then reached for the phone beside him. This session is adjourned for recess. 30 minutes. No explanation, no eye contact. He walked off the bench and into his chambers, shutting the door behind him. People in the room exchanged looks. No one said a word. Downstairs, 2 men in gray suits walked through security without being stopped. No badges flashed. No weapons drawn. They didn't need either. They handed a sealed folder to the clerk. Inside, a document bearing the seal of the Department of Defense and a second stamped Office of Military Legal Oversight. The clerk stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. Of course. This way, sir. Maya looked up when the door opened. The older man entered first. Calm, clean-cut, purposeful. Miss Ellison, he said with a nod. Your father sends his regards and his apologies for the delay. She stood, silent. The younger agent added, you've been reinstated. All internal actions dropped. Court presence authorized under military legal protection. No drama, no apology, just precision. She didn't ask what was said. She didn't need to. As they turned to leave, the older agent paused at the door. The judge will receive a follow-up from the Office of Military Justice in 20 minutes. If there's anything you want added to the record, now is the time. Maya glanced at the desk. Her motion folder, the one they tossed aside earlier, still sat there, a little crumpled, still intact. She picked it up, smoothed the corners, held it close. I do, she said. Outside the room, Officer Logan Crane stood in the hallway. He stiffened as the 2 men passed him. The older one stopped. Officer Crane. Crane nodded, slowly. Per directive, your authority on this matter is terminated. Effective immediately. Crane didn't speak, didn't argue. He just stepped back. Maya walked down the corridor between the 2 agents. No cuffs, no folder dragging behind her, no one questioning her presence anymore. She wasn't saved. She wasn't spared. She was seen. And in a building built to silence her, that was the loudest thing of all. The courtroom had never felt quieter. Judge Glenn Murray returned to the bench with shoulders a little stiffer than before. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and nodded toward the man standing at the front of the room. Colonel Samuel Ellison. decorated, composed, impeccably dressed in Class A uniform, every medal, every stripe earned the hard way. But today he wasn't here as a symbol of rank. He was here as a father and a witness. He stepped forward slowly, not to demand, not to confront, just to clarify. He placed a single folder on the evidence table, tapped it once with the side of his hand. This, he said calmly, is documentation verifying that Miss Maya Ellison was appointed as legal counsel and civilian advocate in the matter of Deshaun Miller versus Ashford County. Her clearance credentials and case designation were all filed with this court prior to her appearance. The room didn't move. Colonel Ellison's voice remained steady. She was not trespassing. She was not interfering. She was fulfilling the duty assigned to her and doing so with the professionalism expected of any legal officer, past or present. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look around the room for approval. He only turned to Officer Crane, still seated behind the bar, his hands clasped, jaw tight, and asked one question. Did you ever ask who she was? Crane didn't answer, not out of defiance, but because the answer was already obvious to everyone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was weighty, not angry, just undeniable. Maya sat still on the side bench, her folder resting across her lap. She hadn't said a word since entering the room again. She didn't need to. People began to shift in their seats slightly but noticeably. Lawyers, clerks, even a bailiff. One nodded to her just faintly. Another glanced down, uncomfortable. No one had apologized. No one had said she was right. But something was changing in the quiet, in the way eyes no longer looked past her, but at her. Colonel Ellison turned back to the judge. Your Honor, he said evenly, there's nothing more to add. The record speaks for itself. If this court has further questions, I will remain available. He stepped back without another word. The judge looked down at the documents, then at Maya, then back to Crane, who now stared fixedly at a crack in the floor tile. After a pause, the judge finally spoke. We'll resume proceedings on the Miller case shortly. The matter concerning Ms. Ellison is closed. No drama, no ruling. But the gavel dropped, and the echo was louder than any verdict. As the room slowly stirred, someone opened the side door. Sunlight streamed in across the wooden floor, falling softly at Maya's feet. She stood, not hurried, not triumphant. And for the first time since walking into Ashford County Courthouse that morning, no one tried to stop her. No one questioned whether she belonged, because now even the silence had learned to listen. Maya could have walked out. No one would have blamed her. The doors were open, the hallway clear. Her name had been cleared, her file reinstated. She was free to go. But freedom wasn't the reason she came here. She stood outside courtroom 3B for a moment, her hand resting on the door frame. The same door where hours earlier, no one knew who she was or cared to find out. Now the silence inside was different. Still cautious, still tight, but it was listening. She stepped in, heads turned, conversations paused. The judge glanced up, surprised but not resistant. At the defense table, Harris, the overworked public defender, looked stunned to see her. You sure? He asked quietly as she approached. Maya nodded once. He still needs a voice, she said. That hasn't changed. She handed him the folder, the one with the reprinted motion and the USB drive. This is the body cam footage, she added. Chain of custody intact. Time stamped. It shows everything the report left out. Harris blinked, then looked down at the motion as if seeing it for the first time. Maya stepped back, not to the witness stand, not to center stage, just to the side. The judge read the paperwork, tapped his pen twice, then spoke. Motion to introduce supplemental evidence approved. A whisper spread through the room. Harris turned to Deshaun, who had been sitting quietly, his hands folded, shoulders tight. When Maya's eyes met his, something passed between them. Not thanks, not shock, just something simple, hope. For the first time since his arrest, Deshaun's posture changed. Just slightly, like someone had finally turned a light back on in a room that had been dark too long. No applause, no drama. Just a folder open, a judge nodding, and a life beginning to tilt back toward justice. Maya didn't speak again. She didn't need to. She had done what she came to do. No camera crew waited at the door. No headline followed her steps. But when Maya walked out of Ashford County Courthouse, something had changed, and not just in the court records. Behind her, the final motions of the day continued. Judges called names, clerks stamped files. The system carried on unbothered, but not untouched. In a nearby hallway, a law student who'd been sitting quietly in the back during the hearing opened her phone. Her hands trembled just a little as she uploaded the 47-second clip she'd recorded earlier. The moment Maya, still cuffed, said calmly, "You didn't arrest me because I broke the law. You arrested me because I didn't fit." She paired it with a caption. "I didn't come to win. I came so someone else wouldn't lose." Within an hour, the video would start making its way across feeds, forums, and inboxes. It wouldn't go viral for shock value, but for truth. Truth spoken clearly without shouting. Truth that stayed. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. Colonel Ellison stood by the government sedan, his hat tucked under one arm. He didn't say anything when Maya approached. He just opened the rear door, then paused. She looked at them, he said quietly, and they looked away. Maya gave him a tired smile. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I know, he said. That's why it worked. They stood there for a moment, father and daughter. No salute, no embrace, just understanding. Before she stepped into the car, he spoke once more. You didn't win because of me, Maya. She looked back. You won because you refused to be erased. And then together, without banners, without fanfare, they left. But long after the doors of that courthouse closed for the day, people inside were still replaying what they'd seen. A woman in a plain coat standing when it was safer to stay silent, walking out not to claim a prize, but to remind them all justice doesn't need volume. It just needs someone who won't step aside. If Maya's story meant something to you, take a moment to reflect on what it showed us. That justice isn't always loud, and being heard doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it just takes one person brave enough to stand their ground so someone else doesn't lose theirs. If you believe stories like this matter, please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories. Your support gives our team the motivation to keep telling stories that speak truth, inspire courage, and remind us what it really means to be seen. Thank you for walking this journey with us.